Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over why I believe a lot of men believe that they're not enough, even when they are enough. The first one is I noticed that, I guess I'm going to say society, for lack of better words, has unrealistic standards of men. Society often expects men to be strong, confident, successful, emotionally stable, dominant, but then caring, but also not too caring. But you don't want to be so successful that you're so independent that you ignore your family. But you also don't want to completely be enmeshed with your family because then you're not successful enough. And so these standards are sometimes they're even clashing, right? Because it's really hard. You want to be emotionally stable, but if you're too detached, now you're ignoring your wife or your family, or you're too independent, whatever it is. So like there's no clear set instructions how men are supposed to behave. And I think it's almost like the goalpost is moving constantly. And so basically the way I look at it is no human, I don't think any human on like earth or in general can meet these expectations. Many men feel like they have to, but I don't think it's possible. So that if that is the case, where these unrealistic expectations are the standard, but no human can meet these standards, pretty much all men to some extent will feel like they're not enough if this is the scenario, right? And of course, we're talking about in like a vacuum sense because there are plenty of other variables that are involved. But those two variables alone, putting them together, obviously we can imagine men will probably feel like they're not enough because the standards just they're not logical. The next one is that I feel like both men and women have certain standards for men in comparison to women. So I I was talking to a colleague of mine, and she mentioned something along the lines of, I forgot exactly what it was, but she was saying something. She's also a therapist, and she was mentioning like she notices that a lot of times in marriages, the man is like he sometimes has trouble asking for what he wants or what he needs. And she was like, what can I do about opening patients up like that? And I was mentioning to her, well, a lot of times they feel like their needs are not necessarily as important in the marriage, and sometimes they feel like their needs are a burden, or it changes the entire paradigm, because a lot of men feel like his expectation is to just do what his wife wants, and that makes the marriage better. So in his mind, the marriage has to do with his wife and his children and not much of him. And I think the unfortunate part is a lot of women, they don't realize that that's actually how they make the marriage look like. And then men also expect that of other men. Like if a guy's marriage is failing, a lot of times he might think, what did I do wrong, right? And then a wife might think, what did my husband not do? Right. And that's the interesting mix, because both of them expect more of the husband or the man, right? Both men and women. I think even groups of men, they may, there's research on it. Men tend to respect men who are married, right? And I get that to some extent, but then it puts a lot of pressure, making him feel like if he's not married or his marriage is failing, then he's not enough to some extent. And so by extension of that, all that I mean is that I think men just have more expectations in relationships and in general, and they're always expected to fix things, even over top of maybe what his wife is doing wrong. He might have to readjust, even if it's more easier to some extent, or it's more logical for her to adjust. He's still going to have to work around that. And that's not always the case, but I do see it a lot. And that's very frustrating, because then he's just continuously working and working and working to no ends meet, which is really frustrating. And I kind of can relate to that, not in a relationship sense, but I can understand that feeling a lot, and it's a very frustrating one. Obviously, I'm not a man, but just something to keep in mind. But this third one is something we've talked about before. But men are often taught to earn love, not receive it. And why does this kind of translate to not being enough? At a young age, many of these young boys have the idea that love comes after achievement. And so if you don't get that achievement, you're not lovable and you're not enough. You're kind of like discardable. What would I even say? You're not valuable, right? You can be replaced. You're easily replaced is probably the right word. It's usually like you have to be strong. You have to not show your emotions. Don't be needy. Don't fail. And I think it's interesting because a lot of this comes from fathers. And I'm going to explain something of my own because I can relate to this slightly. Okay, obviously I'm not a girl, but my dad, he doesn't have any sons. And I'm his closest, like I'm the person that he I'm his closest child, like the one that he has the most expectations for. And I actually remember him doing this to me too. So I think if I was a son, it probably would have been more. But he always had like a lot of expectations for me. Don't show your feelings. Don't express things. Don't cry. You have to be strong for, your other siblings. You have to do this. You can't act like this because it's going to make your mom sad. You can't do this because you're going to look like a failure. And I remember those things. And so I kind of can relate to this, where it's like, yes, you feel like you're loved. It's not like you don't feel loved, at least for me. I knew that I was loved by my dad, but it's just he wanted me to be what he wants himself to be, or how he sees himself. And so he was very attached to me in that way. And like a reflection of who I am is how he perceives himself. Like he always tells me as an adult, like I just was on the phone with him this morning, and like I will say something that's like, I was like stressed about something. I was like kind of stressed about work, and I was like, I can't talk too long. I'll call you back later. And then I know him. The fact that I'm stressed about work makes him feel like I'm achieving something. And so then he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm proud of you. You're like the thing that I'm most proud of." Right. And he mentioned that to me, not the thing. I can't remember exactly what he said, but like me being stressed is like an indication that I'm doing something. Or he'll always say like, you're the only person I can count on. And it puts a lot of pressure. And so sorry, I talked about myself a little too much. I really apologize, because this was supposed to be about men. I'm not saying that in a way where I'm trying to put it onto myself. I'm trying to share that I can understand you a little bit. So I wasn't trying to like move the spotlight. That's not what I meant. So I hope it didn't come across like that. All that I meant is I do get this, and I think it does shape your perspective, because I tend to be a little bit more achievement focused, and it's in my behavior. And I think a lot of men feel like they have to earn it. Much more extreme for men than my case, but I do get that. And I think sometimes what happens is a lot of men, they're dating, and a lot of women might reject them for literal metrics, right? They might feel like they're not impressive, they're not worthy, they're not tall enough, they don't make as much money. And it's the same exact thing. Like, same thing when they were a little boy, it's happening in dating. It happens their whole life. They're not enough. And it's a really frightening experience. And to be exposed of that continuously is very overwhelming, right? The next one is emotional expression is discouraged. Men are often taught to hide vulnerability, don't be weak, stop complaining, and they're not taught to understand their own emotions. In fact, they're taught that emotions are wrong, right? Asking for support is weakness. It shows that you're not good enough, that you're not able to, and it makes them feel like they're not seen. And so whoever they are on the inside, that's not enough anyways, because it was automatically rejected when they express something, when they're trying to say, hey, that bothers me, or this is not good enough, or this is concerning me, whatever it is, they're shunned for that. And I mean, that can even translate into marriages. Obviously, we were just talking about earlier, a colleague of mine was mentioning, like, how do I get the husband to open up? Well, he's been discouraged of emotional expression his whole life. It's not sitting there and saying, hey, tell me how you feel. Like, a lot of times he's going to tell you, I don't know. And that is his best answer, right? So you can't force him to say, how do you feel? What's going on? But you can say, like, when your wife did this, how did that make you feel? Or you can even prompt them, right? That sounds really stressful. When she said that, did that bother you at all? You can prompt them to that extent, but you got to build rapport and trust, because most of them are not going to automatically say it, because they're just not used to thinking about it. It's not that they're trying to hide their feelings. It's just they were taught that it's not allowed. The next one is that men often do not have emotional support from their friends or family. And many male friendships, which is, I think, a good thing, but it can also not help with some aspects. And I'm going to break that up. Many men, their male friendships revolve around activities, which is good, right? It balances hormones, etc. But it avoids deep conversations. So without that validation and support, sometimes doubts and fear and discomfort can kind of go unchecked to some extent, and it can create a lot of issues, when they need support, right? If you're going through a divorce, a lot of times you might feel alone. You might feel like you have to handle this alone. If you feel like maybe it's a very painful divorce, maybe you got cheated on, maybe she took all of your stuff, maybe she spread bad information about you, that's a very, very heavy situation. It's very risky to be alone in that situation from a mental health perspective. But a lot of men do it alone, and he has nothing. He's like starting from scratch, right? The next one is men. So a lot of men have literally been left in relationships because she literally thought he wasn't enough. And that can add such a scar that I may have to touch on that in a separate video because that one is, there's a lot to unpack with that one, but it really feeds to this. The next one is the last one. Pain is minimized or mocked. A lot of men express sadness and insecurity, and then what happens when they do, let's say they were young, or even maybe they were courageous and they did it as a teenager, they would get dismissed and ridiculed or just completely ignored. And so where do you put something if it's constantly ignored and unappreciated? Well, you bottle it up and you isolate yourself and you blame yourself. And the truth is, regardless of how someone treats you, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not enough. Like, enough is is something that we as society created. And I think a lot of this comes from what enough means, because a lot of people might believe enough is different. Like, for me, I think everyone is enough to some extent. Like, we don't have really the right to tell somebody that they're not enough or their life is not valuable. And I think sometimes people don't realize that men feel very much like they're just, I guess, a tool or just an object to only be seen from a certain lens, like his achievements or what he can provide. And that makes men feel like they're not enough, on top of the constant criticism that a lot of them face in relationships, in friendships, at work. And so really, it's a mix of social expectations, I think emotional isolation, and also how like love is taught and measured for them, because a lot of times they feel like love is earned. I do, just that's my opinion. And I know for a lot of men it feels like that, and it's like constant suffering and stress. But I hope that one day society or relationships or whatever lifts some of that pressure off of men. And so more men can realize they are enough regardless of what they can provide. So the research is in the description box. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.